carrying on and communicating as anyone. What a dramatic series of changes in this man's life. And Mark has told us the story of exactly what happened to bring about these changes. In fact, he tells us a little bit, though not all of the details, about why the man changed for the worse and what that could be attributed to. And then he tells us how it is that the man was restored and healed. And that's the essence of the miracle. Perhaps you had heard the story before we shared it this morning, but here was a man, Mark says, as we've already described, living out in the tombs, possessed by demonic forces. And as soon as Jesus moves in the boat with his disciples to the other shore, no sooner as he stepped out of the boat than the man is propelled toward him from this unclean area of the dead. And the demons, Mark says, speak forth from him, acknowledging Jesus' identity. Now, we've already said in past accounts that Mark has Jesus in his ministry performing many healings and many exorcisms. Now, there's no doubt that in Mark's day and time there were many things attributed to the work of unclean spirits, as he says, that we today might take as something else, medical issues or mental issues. But there's also no doubt that Mark is telling us something very real is going on here, and be careful that we not completely remove this from our perspective on reality. He's trying to tell us that evil is real and in some way has manifested itself in this man's life and confronts Jesus as he disembarks the boat. Jesus converses with this unclean spirit who happens to be not one but many. In fact, Mark says that the man or the spirit is identified in the man as legion. And he sets up this undercurrent of a theme, and that is that this man is possessed by not one, but many demons. A legion was a Roman outfit of 6,000 soldiers. And perhaps Mark is making an allusion to this battle of good and evil, of God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom in the midst of this man's life, in this event, and perhaps throughout the gospel. Nonetheless, Jesus exorcises and casts out the demons into a herd of swine who are on a neighboring hill. They rush destructively into the water and they are all drowned, and the people are fearful of Jesus' power and authority. I have to confess, as I read this, it says that they asked Jesus to leave their district. I have no doubt they were looking at the cleanup of 2,000 swine who had rushed into their nearby lake and were thinking, oh my goodness, what are we in for? The man wants to go with Jesus, but Jesus says, no, your job is to go and tell among these 10 cities of the Decapolis, Gentile cities, all that God has done for you. And he leaves, and as soon as the story has started, it's over. And we had many questions about the story, about what this means for us. Some questions that we may not be able to answer fully. But Mark does tell us some things that are no longer in question, and that's really the point of the story. You see, as we've said about all of the miracles of Jesus, they're interesting events. This didn't happen every day, even in Jesus' ministry, and so Mark relates the event. And it's meant to impress us and place us in a position of awe at Jesus' ministry and what he does. But it's also meant to tell us something more. You see, first of all, Mark is reaffirming to us Jesus' power over evil. Jesus bringing the power of God and its triumph over evil. Intertwined with this is Jesus' identity. And throughout Mark's gospel, though the religious leaders and even the disciples may continue to ask the question, who is this guy? And that literally is what they say. On occasion after occasion after occasion, they ask the question, who is this? And they struggle with the answer. Mark wants us to know all of the host of evil know who this is. And so the man with the unclean spirit bows at his feet and says, Jesus, Son of the Most High God, what have you to do with us? Mark wants us to know that in Jesus, God's power over evil has come and is triumphant. He also wants us to see in this picture the destructive forces of evil in our lives, among humanity, and the healing, restorative power of God's kingdom. Just in case there was any question about the outcome, but also the nature of God's kingdom, Mark leaves that question fully answered. Jesus has come with God's power and is triumphant. But much more. The power of evil leads to destruction. And so we capture that in a snapshot of this man and of the entire story, even of the end of this herd of swine. But God's power, the power that Jesus brings, the power of the kingdom, is one that heals and restores. It delivers from evil and places us clothed and in our right minds with Jesus. Mark is also telling us that Jesus brings the kingdom in a way that turns things upside down. It's no wonder that the people begged Jesus to leave, because everything has been turned upside down. Their livelihood now is in question. They're the center of attention. They're not sure maybe all that has happened, but they know that life, their world, has been turned upside down. And Jesus again and again seems to have this effect as he moves throughout Galilee, healing, exercising, delivering, ministering, teaching. Jesus turns the world upside down. And so it is that the kingdom comes and shakes our world and turns everything upside down and yet to its rightful place. Mark is telling us about this triumphant power over evil, about the destructive power of evil, and the restorative healing nature of the kingdom. Though it turns everything upside down, it puts it in its rightful place. But here perhaps is Mark's most compelling lesson. It's not that you and I should be on the lookout for demons anywhere and everywhere. It's not just that here is an amazing story of one who went through some of those dramatic changes and whose appearance was telling, who came from the depths of evil to be restored and placed in a rightful mind and a rightful life in relation to Jesus' healing. But Mark wants us to know this. Jesus' word is powerful. Jesus' word has authority. Even the demons, even this excessive case of evil, cannot resist the power of Jesus' word. Jesus brings a powerful, authoritative word. And here's how Mark draws us in. He says, if all of the host of evil, if Satan's powerful legions must comply with Jesus, if they recognize who Jesus is, how much more should you and I? Think about that for just a moment. How much more should you or I? You see, the irony of it is that those who heard Jesus scratched their heads and questioned whether they should obey Jesus' words of authority, Jesus' words of power. And they asked the question, who is this? And it wasn't necessarily wrong to ask the question. But Mark says the answer is already decided. The answer is before you. After all of the host of evil know and understand in just a moment who this is. And they must comply with his words of life and of the kingdom, of the triumph of God. How about you, Mark says? You, the one who hears this story. Dare we go away and simply say, well, Jesus brought some inspirational words and I'll consider them. Jesus had some interesting insight about life, and I'll put that on the shelf right next to all the other interesting insights about life and how to get along. Let me think about what Jesus has to say. I don't want to really answer that question now. I've got too many other things to do. Too many other perspectives on life that I want to consider. Sometimes we take Jesus' word and we're not too sure we buy all of it. After all, it might turn our world upside down. Mark says, listen and look and perceive the power of Jesus' word. It has compelling authority that even the host of evil must give in to. And how about you? How much more you as the hearer in this story? How much more should you comply? How much more should you give weight, all weight, and all concession to what Jesus says and to what he asks of you? That, my friends, is the point of the story. Lest we go away and say it's amazing, it's inspiring, and simply place it somewhere in a dark, distant corner of our lives. Mark says, no, this is a word that is compelling, it's arresting, it's dramatic, and it is powerful, not just for the hosts of evil, but for you. Will you recognize who this is? Will you recognize his authority? And will you, in a much greater and graceful and loving way, find yourselves compelled to see who this is and comply with his word? A word of grace, a challenging word, but a word of love, a powerful word, a word that turns everything upside down, and yet a word that invites us to our rightful place in God's kingdom. No longer out among the tombs, no longer in the grip of power, in the grip of evil's power, but restored and healed and in our right minds. What will we do with Jesus and his word of power